Chapter 3 The Time Trap by Henry Kuttner. Mason turns his head and sees Eric the Cimmerian at the door. The man comes striding swiftly down the ramp, his cold eyes harsh. "Hear me, Nervor." The silver priestess hisses sharply. The black leopard hesitates, slinking back to its place. Nervor turns blazing eyes on the Cimmerian.
"Since when have you commanded me?"
"I speak for the master," Eric says smoothly, with an undertone of faint mockery, "and I do not think that even you care to defy him." With an angry gesture, Nervor turns away, touches the altar. Again the pallid moonfires spring up. The Cimmerian says, "I shall not speak of this episode to Grettir Clon, nor would I advise you to do so." The priestess makes no reply, and Eric grips Mason's arm, nodding towards the door. Silently, Mason follows the other. Once they are in the corridor, Eric blows out a long breath of relief. "She's a demon, Mason. She and her familiars, those giant cats. Come along." He pulls Mason with him till they reach the Cimmerian's apartment. There, safely ensconced on furs, Eric grins wryly. "I thought the metal men had you, but you're not safe yet unless you want to take your chances with the master."
"Why should he harm me?"
Mason asked without much assurance. "Well, there was another man who came as you did, out of nothing, a man named Murdoch. He's in the vaults, chained and captive. I don't know why. True, Grettir Clon may not chain you."
"I'd rather not make the experiment.
But doesn't the master know I'm here?" "He isn't sure. Nervor won't betray you, for that would mean betraying herself. I think you can hide in Albuquerque for a while anyway. It's easy to find a white camel in a herd, but if it's dyed brown—" The Cimmerian gets up and finds a length of cloth and a light cloak. "You'd best wear these." Mason nods. "When in Rome," he observes, but the other only stares. Then he remembers, Rome will not be born for 1,000 years. Quickly, Mason fashions himself a loincloth and throws the cloak over his shoulders. Eric hands him a dagger. "I have no better weapon," he apologized. "My scimitar I need myself." He leads the way out into the passage, talking as he walks. "As for the master, I don't know where he came from. Once Albuquerque was a paradise. Then Grettir Clon came, and with his magic enslaved us all. I was visiting Albuquerque when he arrived, having had occasion to flee Nippur." Diabolic mirth tinges his grim face for a moment. "When my caravan got here, Aleza ruled. Then suddenly Grettir Clon came. I did not see that. Some say he sprung out of empty air in broad daylight. He made himself ruler, and took Aleza as hostage, and keeps her imprisoned. He has made this into a city of fear. Look about you." Eric flings an arm out at the green-lit corridor. "Albuquerque was not unduly beautiful before, but now it's like living underground with devils. Well, cities are no places for men anyway. But none can escape. Some have tried and died. Grettir Clon's slaves are everywhere." The passage broadens. Behind them comes quick-footed steps. Mason feels the Cimmerian nudge him. Racing past comes a metal robot. If it sees them, it gives no heed. From the distance comes the thudding tramp of many feet. The clanging note of a bell rings out. Eric curses. His eyes roll as though seeking a way of escape. More robots pass them. Mason grips his dagger. "No!" The Cimmerian seizes his wrist and pulls his hand from the weapon. His voice is low and urgent. "There's danger, but we may escape. Come!" He quickens his footsteps. The metal men move on, armed tentacles swinging, bulging eyes astare. The clatter of their footsteps fill the passage. The bell clangs out again. "It summons the city to the council room," Eric says. "All must be there. We've no chance to find a hiding place for you now. We must wait." "It summons the city to the council room." 5 minutes later, they emerge into a great high-ceilinged room. It is vast, awe-inspiring in its bare hugeness. It is of white stone, windowless, lit with the inevitable green glowing bars. Tunnel mouths ring the walls. A multitude of men and women, a few children, are pouring from the passages. Guided by Eric, Mason joins the rest. At one end of the great chamber is the raised dais, bare save for a silvery metal ovoid that hangs in the air, apparently without support. It is perhaps 7 feet long. Strangely, it reminds Mason of a coffin. At sight of it, he feels Eric grow tense beside him. The room is filling with a surging multitude, brown-faced, furtive-eyed. They speak in hushed tones among themselves, casting occasional quick glances towards the dais. To Mason it is strange indeed to hear the low mutterings of a language which no longer exists, save among a few scholars, in his time at least. From the high ceiling a black disc drops. Its descent is arrested, and it hangs swaying above the crowd. The whisperings die into silence. Two robots, side by side, emerge from a tunnel mouth beyond the dais. At their heels comes rolling something like a great metal sphere with the top sliced off, a huge hollow cup. Over its edge, Mason sees a swollen, blue-veined, bald head, bulbous and hideous, a monstrously bloated caricature of a human skull, with two sharp, beady eyes peering out intently from beneath the tremendous brain case. Mason casts a sidelong glance at the Sumerian. Eric's eyes are cynical, yet they are troubled, too. Mason realizes that the warrior's half-contempt for the master has not been quite real, that it masks an uneasy, reluctant fear of Grettir-Klon. To Eric, the master must appear like some monstrous baroque, for he does not realize or understand, as does Mason, that with the passing of hundreds of thousands of years, the human race will evolve into beings like the strange man on the dais. Slowly, the car rolls on behind the robots. A pale, slender hand with elongated, tentacular fingers arrives into view above the edge of the cup. The robots pause on the dais, and the car wheels between them to face the audience, among which Mason sees other robots stand like guards. A murmur goes up from the throng. "The Master!" Mason lifts a quizzical eyebrow. He can understand now how Grettir-Klon maintains his rule over the superstitious natives of Albuquerque, playing on their fear of the unknown. The entire auditorium, he sees suddenly, is like a huge theater, cunningly arranged to impress the beholder with its mystery, its strangeness. Mason might find danger in the formidable science of Grettir-Klon, but this mummery he can recognize and discount. Somehow he does not feel so utterly lost and helpless now. The master lifts a slender hand, and the throngs kneel. Mason finds a position behind a fat, shaven-headed man in a woolen cloak. From the black disc dangling overhead comes a flat metallic voice. Mason glances up cautiously. The apparatus, a radio amplifier probably, must be strange indeed to Eric and the others. "I have imprisoned Eliza, your queen," the voice says emotionlessly. "For a long time she has been my hostage, ever since I learned she was plotting to revolt against me. I have warned you, people of Albuquerque, that at the first sign of another revolt she would die. Well, there has been no such attempt, that I grant." The master's inscrutable eyes rove over the kneeling throng. Mason looks down quickly as the probing glance moves towards him. Again the toneless voice sounds. "The prison of Eliza has been in plain view, as a warning, yet it was forbidden to touch it. That command has not been obeyed." Grettir-Klon's head bends for a moment. A robot appears in the tunnel mouth behind the dais, a tentacular arm curling about the neck of a girl who walks beside it. A girl of perhaps 20, her dark eyes distended, her hair matted with dried blood. She wears a plain white robe, torn and stained. The metallic ovoid that hangs above the dais drops lower. The silvery sheen changes. Over its surface a shimmering play of color crawls. It becomes transparent as glass. Within it is a girl. Mason feels the Sumerian nudge him. "Eliza, our ruler." She lays within the transparent coffin, eyes closed, her dark hair falling in ringlets about an ivory piquant face. And there's strangely elfin beauty about her, enhanced by a close-fitting green garment she wears. Mason catches his breath, staring with his eyes. A scarcely noticeable movement goes through the throng. "It is death to touch Eliza's prison," the disc says coldly. "Let no one turn away his eyes." Robots hold the white-robed girl firmly. Others bring forward a curious appliance. Swiftly they rip away the single garment, bearing the captive slim body in utter nudity. She cries out and fights vainly to escape. But the robots are too strong. Dozens of circular discs, transparent as glass, are pressed against the girl's flesh, clinging apparently by suction. Flexible tubes lead from them to a bulky machine on the dais. A movement nearby draws Mason's attention. A man has risen to his feet, a brawny warrior with gray-streaked beard who is staring fascinated at the spectacle. Mason, following his gaze, feels cold horror touch him. The girl on the dais is changing. The skin beneath the innumerable glass cups grows red and inflamed. She screams in agony, writhing against the metallic arms of the robots. Her naked body is no longer white, as it was covered with dozens of crimson discs. Mason understands. The air within the glass cups is being pumped out. Powerful suction is wrenching at the girl's flesh. There are little beads of perspiration on Eric's face. The Sumerian's jaw is grimly set, but he cannot disguise the fear in his eyes. Under cover of the low murmur that fills the room, Mason mutters, "It's trickery, Eric." The Sumerian turns doubtful eyes upon him, glancing back swiftly to the dais. From the corner of his mouth he whispers, "You are wrong, Maison. This is not the first time it has happened. I do not like being afraid, Maison." The girl shrieks, her voice knife-edged with pain. The frightful suction tears at her flesh. Blood spurts into the glass cups. Nerves and veins and arteries are ripped into ghastly chaos. Her body becomes a shapeless mass of puffy, bleeding meat. Someone shouts. Mason turns his head in time to see a spear flash through the air, hurled by a greybeard he had already noticed. Like a white flame, the weapon flashes through the room, races at the master, and rebounds, falls clattering to the stones. A beam of yellow light darts out from the dais. There is a shrill scream as the ray impinges on tender skin. It swings towards the greybeard. The man shouts, toppling back, his face a blackened, cindery mass. "Beware," the disc roars. "Beware the vengeance of the master." "I knew him," the Sumerian muttered. "It was his daughter whom the master slew just now." He stops as the murmuring of the throng suddenly dies away. In the stillness, the voice of the black disc sounds unnaturally loud. "Let 794 come forward," it says. Eric draws in his breath sharply. Then, without a glance at Mason, the Sumerian rises and strides towards the dais. Just before he reaches it, he comes to a stop, facing the master. "Where is the stranger who is in your quarters?" The voice comes from Greder Klon's thin lips, not from the amplifying disc overhead. Eric says loudly, "I do not know. He escaped from my quarters." Mason knew the words were intended for his own ears. So apparently did Greder Klon. The master's voice rings out again. "I speak to you, stranger. Come forward." Mason does not move. A robot steps forward. Its tentacle arm coils about Eric's neck. The Sumerian's hand leaps to the hilt of his scimitar and then falls away. Amazingly, the toneless voice speaks in English, oddly accented but recognizable. "I mean you no harm. Come forward if you wish to return to your own time sector." Startled, Mason involuntarily makes a movement, hesitates, and then stands up quickly. After all, he has no choice. The tentacle about Eric's neck silently warns him of the torture that will be inflicted on the Sumerian if the master is not obeyed. Mason hurries forward, the target of furtive glances, passing Eric without a word. The swarthy warrior stares straight ahead, his face immobile. Greder Klon nods, and the robot uncoils its tentacles from Eric's neck, twining it instead about Mason's upper arm. There is no menace in the gesture, rather it seems as though the creature has taken his arm to guide him. Mason feels a gentle tug, and the robot urges him towards the tunnel mouth behind the dais. The weird spherical metal head with its strange faceted eye stares down at him blankly. With a glance at Eric, Mason follows the robot past the still form of Eliza, motionless within her transparent prison. Again, the elfin beauty of her catches at Mason's throat. Then the green-lit depths of a passage swallow them. He is taken to the great room of two monoliths. There he waits, still with the cold tentacle curled about his arm, till the sound of tramping footsteps comes. Into the huge chamber comes the two guardian robots. Behind them, Greder Klon in his metal car. The master stops the vehicle, swings open a door, laboriously climbs out to the floor. Now Mason has an opportunity to study the strange man more closely. He is short, his body dwarfed but thick-set, and the arms are slender, boneless, terminating in elongated fingers. The bowed legs are thick and strong. They have to be, in order to support the tremendous brain case. A close-fitting black garment covers the stocky body, the shoulders of which scarcely come to Mason's waist. The dwarf's head is papery white, blue-veined. Almost, Mason can imagine, it pulsates within the throb of the living brain within. The bones of the skull must be very thin. The thought stirs something in his mind. The tiny pointed jaw moves, and a shrill voice speaks in syllables Mason does not understand. He says, in English, "I am sorry, but I do not speak your tongue." The other replies haltingly in the same language, "I know yours, have studied records." He lapses into pure Semite, speaking more fluently. "Let us speak the root tongue. I have had reason to speak it much of late, though at first it gave me difficulty. You are from the future, so am I, but a future far later than yours." He nods. The tentacle unwinds from Mason's arm. The robot paces away, turning with a heap of furs. Gregor Klon drops upon them, and the robot brings more furs, throws them in a heap beside Mason. He too sinks down. "Let me explain. In my day I built a time machine, a projector which hurled me back into the past. There was an error in my calculations almost fatal. I had intended to move only a few days into the future, but the time current was very swift. I emerged in this ancient city, and I had no way of returning. My time projector was not, of course, in existence. It would not exist till I built it far in the future." The cold eyes dwell enigmatically upon Mason. "I rebuilt my device, this time somewhat differently, for I do not wish to err again. I do not care to go back to the Pliocene or on to a dying, airless world. I have not yet finished my experiments. Do you know why I have told you this?" Mason shakes his head. Cameos of muscle ridge on his jaw. "Not friendliness, no. I want your brain, your intelligence. The robots will obey, but they are mindless. There are certain delicate operations and calculations in my own time I had capable assistance. But I cannot use these of barbarians. You can help me. Your mind is undeveloped, but the rudiments of scientific knowledge are there. I wish your aid." He watches Mason for a moment and then goes on. "It is the only way in which you can return to your own time. Do not let emotion sway you. These people here are nothing to me, nor are they to you, save that I can use you. Help me or die." The archaeologist hesitates. He does not doubt that refusal will mean death, or at least torture. He must play for time until he understands more of this alien, enigmatic world. "Very well, I'll help you," Mason speaks wearily. "Good." Greta Klon peers closely at Mason. "You are tired. You must sleep now, and when you are refreshed, we can begin." A robot comes forward. It takes Mason's arm, urging him towards a passage. The voice of the master comes, flat and ominous. "Remember, I do not trust you, but I think you understand that treachery will mean your death." End of chapter 3.